My friends, I have said a number of things from the Bema this High Holy Day season, and it hasn't all landed so well. I know that I disturbed some people on Rosh Hashanah, the morning when I spoke about Hamas, and while I do not step back from what I believe, I do, however, honestly feel bad about upsetting and angering people. And as for Erev Rosh Hashanah, when I spoke about people forgetting that they are Jews, or last night when I reflected on our broken world, I realized that I have touched upon some very depressing topics this season. And I do not want this to be the year in which everyone is left feeling hopeless or despondent, because worrying is already part of our Jewish DNA. You do not need my help for that. I am sure you are familiar with the famous joke about the Jewish telegram, but for the 5 or 6 people in the sanctuary who are not, it's about a telegram that one Jew sends to another. The succinct words read, "Start worrying, details to follow." If you do not get that joke, ask your parents or grandparents to explain it to you. But even though anxiety and worrying may very well be part of our genetic code, I want to end these High Holy Day sermons in a reassuring and hopeful and connecting way. So one of our oldest texts, the Mishnah, has a chapter on the measurements and description of the Second Temple. And in one part of this chapter, it describes the process for how people would ascend and go into the temple. So on the Temple Mount, there was an entryway and an exit. You can still see at least where it was. It's filled in with stones now, but you can see the arches and the entryway and the exitway on the southern side of the Temple Mount to this day. And the people would move clockwise. They would enter through one side, the entryway, then they would give their money or their animal to sacrifice within the temple courtyard, and then they would move around and exit. So this text that I referred to also acknowledges 2 exceptions to the rule. One exception is if you are a mourner, and the other exception is if you have been cast aside. If you are a mourner, or if you've been cast aside, you don't approach the temple as the Mishnah describes in a clockwise manner. Rather, you do so counterclockwise. You enter through the exit and exit through the entry. And the text is explicit as to how this should be handled. As the multitudes of people are walking out, they are compelled to look into the eyes of the person who is walking in and ask them specifically why they are walking in the opposite direction. And the Talmud gives us the exact words to say to that person who is struggling. Just as the person who was struggling was forced to put one foot in front of the other and walk against the current, it was on the rest of the community to see them in their difficulty and ask them about it. And one after another would say, "May God comfort you." may you be wrapped in the embrace of this community. I'm certain that those words and the sheer number of people who said those words must have been so powerfully important to the mourner. Still, just imagine what it was like for those pilgrims. Unless they lived in the city itself, they had made a difficult journey to Jerusalem. But once they arrived, they saw the beauty and splendor and massiveness of the temple. And I assume that they were overcome with emotion. So they begin by immersing themselves in the mikvah to ritually cleanse themselves. Then they ascend the grand staircase and walk through the majestic arched entrance, as I described, the entryway to an elaborately decorated portico. And through the columns of the portico, one could see an enormous courtyard of like 35 acres, which is the equivalent of, I think, the U.S. Capitol grounds and the St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. And in the center of the courtyard, it stood a sanctuary made of marble and gold. And the pilgrims entered this space in the same way that a kid might enter Disney World for the first time, in awe. And as these people processed around the courtyard in rhythm with the masses, I'm sure that they felt as if body and spirit were like transcending time and space. But then something strange occurs. You look and you see the stranger coming at you. Not only walking against the grain, but doesn't seem to have that same sense of celebration and awe and wonder that everyone else has. She or he is clearly suffering. You want to avert your eyes, kind of like if you were on a New York City subway. But our old text of the Mishnah says that you are forbidden to avert your eyes. You have to greet them. You have to say, may God comfort you. May you be wrapped in the embrace of this community. And our tradition understood something that I think we all know as well. At the very moment when you need community, sometimes it can be hard to find and even harder to ask for. That's why we are compelled to be present. Because we know that today we may be walking clockwise, but tomorrow we could be walking counterclockwise. And sometimes just being present is all that matters. You remember what Woody Allen said? 80% of success is showing up. Just think that's what he said, but that was Woody Allen. You know, and I know, by the way, that there are various ways of interpreting that quote from Woody Allen about 80% of success is showing up, but I choose to understand it as meaning that we can accomplish so much and make the world a far better place and deeply strengthen our community just by showing up. You know, in the last 6 months, we have introduced a new tradition at our Shabbat evening services. It used to be that when we would read the names of the people on our Kaddish list, first we would read all the names, and then I would invite everyone to rise so we could read the Kaddish together. But the change we've instituted, this is on Shabbat mornings because it's a Shabbat tradition to read our names. The change we've instituted is that now when we read the names of people on our Kaddish list, we ask the mourner to stand when we mention their loved one's name before the congregation is invited to rise. Just the mourner. And I'm sure you can understand why. Because if we're going to be a community, then we need to see people in their time of difficulty. We need to show up for them. And the same, of course, applies to joy. Sometimes when we feel something wondrous, it doesn't even feel real until we share it with someone. You know, like, I got into college. It's better when you share it than when you just say it to yourself. The doctor called to say that the margins are clear. I've been sober for a full year. I ran my first half marathon. I think I'm falling in love. Doesn't sound as good when you just say it to yourself. It's just as important when we're there to be with each other in moments of joy. We deeply need to share our joys because it enriches the joy. It's like that famous proverb which said that shared joy is doubled and shared pain is halved. And this means that we need people to be present, to hear what's going on in our lives. And by the way, showing up and being present is a benefit to everyone, because about 45 years ago, researchers at the University of Parma in Italy, just after they invented Parmesan cheese there, immediately after, they discovered something fascinating, and it's called mirror neurons. And I see a handful of people nodding their heads because they know what mirror neurons are. They discovered that the pleasure centers of our brains fire up at a very strong rate, by the way, when watching someone else do something pleasurable. We experience joy at another person's joy. And we experience wonder at another person's wonder. We even experience gratitude at another person's gratitude. We need each other. And the synagogue is the best place to find that community, especially now. You know Maimonides, the Rambam, the exceptional 12th century philosopher. He discusses the idea of friendship, and he divides friendship into three categories. He says that there are friendships for benefit, friendships for pleasure, and friendships for virtue. Friendships for pleasure and benefit, he says, are both fleeting. They end when the benefit or pleasure ends. But friendships for virtue are more dependable and more lasting because they rely on mutual concern and shared purpose. They are rooted in a shared dream. And that's why the connections and community we build at Temple Beth Shalom, that's why it's so meaningful and so important. We are all working towards a higher goal. These are all friendships of virtue. We want Judaism to flourish. It was like Jody said, we want to pay it forward. We want our kids to be part of our heritage, all of us. We feel our previous generations whispering to us about the sacrifices that they made to get us to this place. That is mutual concern and shared purpose. Look around you. Not your family, look past your family. Just slightly past your family. Look just one seat past your family. That's the person. These are the faces of your closest friends. These are the people, the faces of the people who make up your community. These are the people who will be at your house for Shiva. These are the people setting up an oneg following your kid's bar mitzvah. These are the people you call when you want to catch a movie. These are the people you think of when you want to share some of your greatest joys. And while I know that it is individuals who most certainly create relationships, I also know that the synagogue is the environment where these relationships have so often been formed, where they have so often been developed, cultivated, and solidified. The fact is that we thrive off of the relationships that we create at this temple because they nourish us, they sustain us, they fill us. You know, for those of you who spend time out west, you may have come across the aspen tree. Now, if you're not familiar with the aspen tree, let me describe it for you. Aspen tree does not grow alone. They're found in groves and clusters. The reason for this is that these trees multiply from their roots. Every year, new shoots spring up from the roots. And the best part is, in some groves, all of the trees may actually be connected one to the other by their roots. It's as if they are one tree. And there's another tree, by the way, you may have heard of, the giant California redwood. This huge tree can reach more than 350 feet in the air and tall. You can carve a tunnel inside the tree, through the tree trunk, big enough for a car to drive through. Now, you would think that these trees would need significantly deep roots to anchor it down against the strong winds. But it's not the case. In fact, the roots are actually quite shallow on the California redwood. They spread out wide in search of surface water. And they reach in all directions, intertwining with the roots of other redwoods, locked together. All the trees support each other in winds and storms. Aspens and redwoods never stand alone. They need one another to survive. And it's the same with us. We too are connected by a system of roots. Jewish roots, especially here in Annapolis. Because for most of us, our extended families live in other areas. We depend on our friends to be like family. It's these relationships that nurture and guide us. And like the giant redwoods, we do best when we hold on to one another and help each other to keep standing through life's storms. So I began my remarks by acknowledging how my previous sermons this year had been angering or depressing or both, and how I wanted to end in a more hopeful way. Well, here it is. Temple Beth Shalom is your community. We want to be your community. We need it just as much as I think you do. And for those of you, by the way, who purchased tickets to be with us here on these High Holy Days as guests, I am so glad that you wanted to be with us. But please know that there is far more to a synagogue than just Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Above all, we are a community. We want to be the first place you think of when a tragedy happens, or when celebrations are imminent. We want to be the place you come to when you're feeling lonely or cast aside. We want to be the place where you see some of your oldest and strongest friends. We want to be the place that you think of when you're feeling vulnerable or unheard. We want this building to be a sanctuary for you in the purest of definitions. You know, in America and even right here in Arnold, there are many terms to describe this place. Some people call this place a synagogue. Others call it a temple. Still others use the Yiddish term shul. Others use a combination. But in Israel, they do not use these words. In Israel, there are three other ways of referring to a synagogue. The first is Beit Midrash, a home of learning. And my hope is that Temple Beshalom always serves as your home for satisfying your intellectual curiosity. The second is Beit Tefillah, a house of prayer. May Temple Beth Shalom always provide you with the sacred space and sacred opportunities to create spiritual moments. But the third most common and most important Hebrew expression to describe a synagogue is Beit Knesset, a home for gathering, a home for community, a home for connection.